A new poll from the Angus Reid Institute shows a large percentage of people who identify as Chinese Canadian have experienced some type of racism since the start of the coronavirus pandemic. Of those surveyed, half say they've been insulted since the pandemic was declared, while 43% said they have been threatened or intimidated. For more on those results, we've reached Shachi Kurl. She's the executive director of the Angus Reid Institute in Vancouver, and Tung Chan is a former city councillor and deputy mayor of Vancouver. He was also the chair of the board of trustees at the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21. Nice to see you both. Thank you for making time.
Thanks, Shachi.
Good afternoon.
Shachi, I'll start with you. Can you lay out kind of what are the big highlights of what you found?
For me, there's two big takeaways from this, Shachi. We've known for some time that there have been isolated and anecdotal cases of anti-Chinese discrimination since the outbreak. What this has done is really measure and put some perimeters around the length and breadth and scope and size of the problem and help us understand the level of frequency it's happening at, the intensity, who it's happening to, and so for the first time we have some data. We've got some empiricism behind this, which takes the conversation from a place that is less anecdotal and more based in knowledge. Okay, now we have a jumping off point. Where do we go from here? What do we do about it? And it says to me that it is quite widespread, as you mentioned. The other takeaway really is about the impacts on Canadians of Chinese ethnicity. And there are two impacts. One is practical. They're changing their routines. They're trying to do things differently in their day-to-day lives to avoid these kinds of interactions. That's very concerning. The other thing we're seeing is the impact on psyche. The idea that they do not feel that they are seen by the rest of the country as equally Canadian or fully Canadian. And what has the last 3 months sort of done to that perception? I think that's quite a heartbreaking finding, frankly.
It sure is. And Mr. Chan, I saw you nodding there. Does any of this, what is your, I guess, reaction to those results, the kind of starkness of those numbers?
Well, I want to start off by thanking Angus Reid Institute and Shachi for doing this survey. And as she says, we have know about this as a Chinese Canadian of Chinese ethnicity. My friends have been telling me about this kind of issues. However, we never had any concrete, solid data points to support it. So we now have it. And the question really is, what are we going to do about it? And I've been in banking for 20 years. And in the business world, we always says what gets measured gets done. We now know there's a problem facing all of us because this is a multicultural society and the country is made up of different fabrics. And now we know one of the fabrics that make up of this country is now under attack and that they feel that they're outsiders. They don't feel that they are being viewed as Canadians. What are we going to do about it? Because if we have one strand that's weakened, the entire country, the entire society is weakened. And this call for action, and I think that's important, we have been hearing every morning, every day from our Prime Minister that racism is no place in this country. And yet, thanks to Shachi and thanks for Angus Reid, we now have this data that says that Chinese Canadians of Chinese heritage, even though they feel 90% of the people feel that Canadian identity is a very important identity, fully 1/3 or more than one quarter, more than 1/3 of them, 1 in 9, felt that they have never been treated or regarded as a Canadian. How can that be in this country? How can that be in this world when this country, when we have said consistently that this is a country that welcomes people from different countries? And how can we, in fact, to feel that, how can we as a country and Canadians to allow this to happen? So I've been hearing that, and now we have data to support it.
It really does stand out in this data, Shachi. The how many said being Canadian is a key part of their identity, and correct me if I've got this wrong, 88% versus how many said they are viewed as Canadians by others, 13% said all the time.
That's correct. And so you've got near unanimous views of a very strong Canadian identity, a very strong sense of being Canadian. And the piece of it that really stands out to me is that 13% who feel that they're viewed as Canadian all the time. Now, Others say that they feel that way mostly or sometimes, but let's face it, citizenship in this country isn't about doing what you need to do as a Canadian some of the time or mostly. We don't sometimes pay our taxes. We don't sometimes vote. We don't sometimes volunteer or do the things that we're supposed to do as good citizens. So again, it's just that test, that Canadian enough bar that is often set for so many people in our society, be they visible minorities, people of color, those who are Black or Indigenous. And here is yet, you know, it just feels like the first half of this year has been so galvanized by these conversations. But here we now know what the takeaway is. There's also another takeaway I'd like to highlight if we have time, Vashi, and that's about where Chinese Canadians view the last 3 months of coverage on COVID-19 and the impact it's had on how they perceive their own community being viewed. And they ultimately see it as a net negative impact. And so I understand that journalists have a job to do. We all get that. It's not their job to sugarcoat. It's not their job to self-censor. But I think, as we have noted over the last 3 months, every time someone like the President of the United States, and frankly, he's not the only one, who goes out and finds a way to tie the spread of the coronavirus to people of a certain ethnicity, in this case, Chinese ethnicity, that gets reported. Many people consuming that news will say, well, that's ridiculous, or that's not right. But many, many people also say, I guess that's truth then, because it's coming from a place of power. It's coming from a pulpit of credibility. And that ends up in the public discourse. And you see from Chinese Canadians that they feel very blamed for the spread of COVID-19, regardless of whether they're immigrants or they're third-generation Canadians. And they feel as though ultimately that boomerang effect has come back to them through some of the media coverage. So not necessarily on this show, but certainly a place, again, of discussion and jumping off. How do we handle these things? How do we deal with these things meaningfully going forward?
Yeah, and let's look going forward, Mr. Chan. You talk about a call to action. What sorts of things would you like to see concretely happen to address what we've just heard laid out?
Well, but before I answer that question, I'll echo what Shachi has said. The media really need to be more careful in how they report those kind of stories. The result of that, though, is that many parents in this particular survey has said that over 50% said that they worry that the kids, when they went to school, is going to bullied and going to be yelled at, and going to be pick names. And that is just not acceptable. Why would children be affected by this kind of unfair coverage? In terms of what we can do, lots. We have already people who said publicly that racism is not acceptable, but they should follow up with actions. So when they see news reports or any columns that masquerading as reporting, but indeed would spread hate and spread racism, that they should call them out. When we have politicians who use dog whistle type of questioning our chief medical officer's ethnicity or loyalty to Canada, this country, everyone should stand up and say, hey, that's not acceptable. When someone wears a badge of honor and says, I am not going to be politically correct and stand in front and say that is what I am, that is just not acceptable, because they should know in a country like ours that when they demeaningly refer to someone by the name or by their ethnic origin or trying to be politically incorrect and proud about it, then they should got to be stopped and they should be sanctioned. And unfortunately, we're not doing that. So that's the start. And then also in terms of education, in our schools, our teachers, in our curriculums, we sort of have to do that. And hopefully in our future generations, we can get this racism, this hate, get out of the psyche.
I appreciate very much both of you making the time to discuss such an important topic. Thanks so much to Shachi Kurl, Executive Director of the Angus Reid Institute, and Tung Chan, a former City Councillor and Deputy Mayor of Vancouver. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.